Christian Twitter has completely exploded with this conversation about interracial marriage. So it started with Joel Webbon, Pastor Joel Webbon, saying that the average Christian woman on social media is retarded. That's low-key true. I wouldn't word it like that. I just say women in general are retarded, but the reality is the average Christian woman on social media is retarded. And I don't say that to be belittling. That's just true, okay? It's just true. But I don't mean to be rude, but this is a lesson for the general public that is simply too valuable to pass up. First, I will truthfully and painfully answer the woman's question without apology. I am against interracial marriage. That is to say, I believe interracial marriage generally goes against God's normative design for humanity, nations, and cultures. Now, allow me to demonstrate why the question is stupid by providing a line of actual good questioning that will have produced far more clarity, beginning with the woman's vague and ambiguous question. Are you for or against interracial marriage? If against, do you believe interracial marriage is a sin? If a sin, do you believe that the act of entering an interracial marriage is a one-time sin, or does it place the individuals in a state of ongoing and continual sin? If a sin, do you believe interracial marriage should be categorized as a crime? If a crime, what penalty do you believe is justified for the civil magistrate to inflict upon the criminal? In other words, there is a millions of miles of distance between being against interracial marriage and capital punishment being the just penalty for those who enter into an interracial marriage. The majority of Christian nationalists that I have partnered with would answer yes to the first question, but no to all the following questions. I personally fall into this category. Believe it or not, Nick Fuentes also falls into this category and has said so many times publicly. Some of the Christian nationalists I have partnered with would answer yes to the first two questions, but no to all the following questions. In regard to the answering yes to the second questions, these individuals would say that the act of entering into interracial marriage is a one-time sin, but does not place the individuals into a state of ongoing and continual sin. I personally disagree with these individuals, but I am not ashamed to call them my brothers. I believe they are wrong in the specific position, but there's no legitimate witness from either scripture or 2,000 years of church history that will condemn their position as a heresy, and therefore the individual who holds such a position should be accepted as brothers in Christ. Thank you for attending my brief lecture in how to think reasonably as a Christian and why women, even Christian women, are generally incapable of doing so. This is why I make no apology in consistently saying that women should log off of social media and devote their attention to baking pies, apple preferably. God bless. All right, so I know this is a very contentious topic. It's a very contentious topic because anything regarding race is contentious. And the reason why it's so contentious is because it's a matter of identity. It's a matter of identity. And when we deal with matters of identity, it is very contentious. This is why BLM was very contentious. This is why immigration is very contentious. This is why the conversations around nationhood is very contentious. This is why conversations about gender is very contentious. Because these are all issues that deal with identity. This is why economic policy is not that contentious. Matters concerning identity, strike the most fundamental parts of our soul on who we are. So then that is contentious. That is contentious. So Dale Partridge said this too in response on interracial marriage. Interracial marriage, as a Christian man happily married to a Mexican Spanish American woman, I agree with Joel Webbon. Interracial marriage is not the ideal. Now, like Joel, I do not believe it's sinful, and if Providence positions two Christians from different ethnic backgrounds to unite in marriage, it can be a glorious thing, which has been for us. However, interracial marriage does create a variety of additional hurdles in marriage and family life, from overcoming different family expectations and cultural traditions to a wife's assimilation into her husband's culture. In addition, the husband must learn how his wife's ethnos has shaped her instincts, sensitivities, and assumptions. There are also external factors from extended family that can feel awkward or frustrating. Identity politics still prevail in a fallen world and cause conflict along the way. To some degree, all of this can extend to children and their lives, family, spouses, etc. Now, by God's grace, He gives those believers called to these unique marriages the endurance to overcome these hurdles. But unity has undoubtedly been more difficult for us than for couples who share the same ethnic background. So while we live in a multicultural mess that has assumed that the melting pot mentality is just as desirable as sharing ethnic similarities and cultures, it's not. It's possible with Christ, but it comes with its own unique hardships. And so he got ratioed, 6.2 million views. People went crazy, insane. And so here's the reality, okay? Here's the reality. I'm going to say this, and you can hate me for it. You can love me for it. I am also against interracial marriage. And there is scriptural background for why I believe so. Broadly speaking, because God has instated people groups and nations and races, Okay? When people say race, it means a lot of different things. When I say race, I mean broad civilizational people groups with common ancestry and culture. Okay? So you can broadly group people into different racial groups, right? You have West Europeans, you have Eastern Europeans, you have Arabs, you have South Asians, you have indigenous Native Americans, you have indigenous, Australians like the Aborigines, you have Samoans, you have Southeast Asians, you have East Asians. So it's like, and you have Sub-Saharan Africans. So these broad civilizational groupings exist. Okay, these exist. Now people say there's no such thing as race. There's only one human race, and this is a semantics thing that we have to get over. That, yes, there is only one human race, that all people are people of the same species. But people use race as to say, like, oh, we're one race, we're the human race, as to say we're one species. We're one, like, kind of being. That's true. Yes, we're all human beings. But there's also another conversation where people are saying race as, again, a broad groupings of civilizational groups. And so if you look at it, we'll get into this, the most ardent proponents and advocates for interracial marriage, they will do this Mott and Bailey thing where they say race does not exist, there's only one human race, but then they will acknowledge the existence of interracial marriage and say interracial marriage is good. So you cannot say in the same vein that race does not exist while also saying that I am in an interracial marriage or I love interracial marriages. Does race exist or not? And in their activism promoting interracial marriages, they actually acknowledge the existence of races. So they're very disingenuous in that way. But to address Joel Webbon and to address Dale Partridge, Dale, I think doing this was not optical. This is not optical. Like, to say and put your wife on blast and your own marriage on blast, I don't think was a wise move. It was not a wise move. Because people will harp on you for it. Because what people will take this as, and I know this wasn't his intention, and this is not what he was doing, but what people will take this as is you are humiliating and throwing your wife under the rug to show why interracial marriage is not ideal. And so there's a lot of people who said a lot of these things, right? And it's like there's a lot of people who ragged on him, who were clowning on him. But yeah, it's just, I'll just say it's not that wise. It's not that wise. But to say, I believe interracial marriage generally goes against God's normative design for humanity, nations, and cultures, I think that is not far off to say, because you see in Deuteronomy, you see in Acts, God has created people groups. And God has created people groups, and by all those people groups, in the end, we'll have every nation, every tribe, every tongue come together and worship Christ. Every knee will bow, every tongue confess that Christ is Lord. But nations, again, nations are a people. So it always has been, biblically speaking, traditionally speaking, it has always been understood as a people. Okay, so there is scriptural backing to say that a people are a people. And if you even look at Old Testament law, okay, the way that God showed the Israelites, he said no interracial marriages with foreigners for the Israelites. Now, there are always exceptions, but the thing is, the exceptions are not prescriptions. But there are instances in the Old Testament where God forbade Israelites from marrying Gentiles and non-Israelites, non-Semitic, non-Hebrew people. So to say that God is for and loves interracial marriage, and if you are as a Christian against interracial marriage, you are sinning against God, is preposterous. It's preposterous flat on its face, okay? Because we see examples of God setting apart the Israelite people to be a people and forbode the Israelites from marrying and having children with foreigners. Now, is that something that applies to all of society today? That is debatable. But I don't think that it is a sin. It is not a sin. It is not a sin to have an interracial marriage. But different races exist. And so if I, as a Korean, marry a Japanese, that is an interethnic marriage, right? But it is not an interracial marriage, and that is easier for homogeneity and unity among the family, generally speaking, than if I were to marry a black woman. because she is from a different, not only a different ethnicity, but completely different race. And a lot of that does come with different cultural backgrounds, different, habits and belief systems and ways of life. And so to be against interracial marriage is not a sin. It's not a sin. There's nowhere in scripture that says it's a sin. And then if you are, and then there's this always like this thing that happens where, oh, if you're against interracial marriage, are you against my marriage? Like, no, like I have friends in interracial marriages. Okay, I know people who are products of interracial marriage. I have friends who are biracial, triracial, whatnot. But you have to understand, and this is a broader point I'll make in a video I'll probably make in the future, that marriages are not just for the individual. Marriage is a political institution. And people be like, what? What? No, it is. Yes, marriage is a covenant. It is sacred between one man and one woman. But it is also, you bring together two families. And the reason why we have marriage ceremonies, right? It is because you are accountable to your community. So your marriage is a part and an extension of your community. So if that's the case, then if a Korean marries a non-Korean, then what happens to that local community? And then broadly speaking, if this is extrapolated, where in Korea, let's say, for example, if Koreans continue to marry non-Koreans, what happens to Korea? It will cease to a certain extent to be Korean. And now people always say, oh, races have always changed throughout time and things like that. Well, yes, we've had new races emerge, but that was over hundreds and thousands of years, but ethnicities have always existed. And so if you are okay with the erasure of nations and national identities, I don't think that's fine. I'm against it. But like, just be honest. Just be honest about that. Yes, it is way worse if a Christian marries a non-Christian. Yes, that is way worse, for sure. But we live in a completely liberal society where that says that we are all blank slate individuals and race doesn't matter. Race does matter. Okay, race does matter. It does matter. And I think this is a good explanation here from Rhett Koppel. If we're using race as interchangeable with species, then of course there's only one race, the human race, and we're having a conversation about biology. However, if the conversation is astroturfed over other contexts like legal realities, it becomes semantical and equivocation and oftentimes duplicitous. Race here is a conglomeration of ethnicities that share easily distinguishable physical characteristics, skin color, facial structure, etc. You can argue all day that race is a construct and should not be recognized, but that doesn't change the very real legal reality that it is, with relative ease and infinite applications. What's more, it is almost always recognized in culturally acceptable ways by those that lecture us that it shouldn't be. Do these evangelicals that are determined to contain the transgressive dialogue on race with this one race platitude support the Civil Rights Act, the defining law of our age, built heavily on the idea that there is not one race? My assumption is that they do. They have to in order to remain in polite company, after all. So here again, we have a situation where the theoretical ideal, we should only acknowledge one race, is at odds with the legal reality, multiple races, lawfare against whites, and all because a bunch of hypocritical, self-refuting, cowardly boomer cons can't break through their myopic conditioning to have an adult conversation. This is to say nothing of the cultural implications of race brought about by those who say there is one race. Like the absurdity of a black man with a platform because of his race telling disenfranchised white men that there's no such thing as race, the cultural reality is literally lecturing the disenfranchised on their theoretical ideal. And to think they're mad at us for saying retarded too. By supporting the CRA regime, Civil Rights Act regime, the BoomerCon has effectively agreed that race is real, legally. Then to turn around and tell the new right that race isn't real, theologically, creates a vacuum where the left is allowed to wield race as a legal weapon, but the right is morally forbidden from even noticing it. With friends like these, I said, who needs enemies? So here's the thing. Race exists. But here's the thing. I see a lot of you in the chat. I see a lot of you in the chat says that Christian and loving God should be the priority over all. That is always true. That is always true. But that cannot be a reason why we dismiss race. Race exists. Race is real. All of you in the chat also acknowledge this. Everyone who says that there's only one human race acknowledges this. Why? Because most people are for the Civil Rights Act. Most people believe in not discriminating based on race. But if race doesn't exist, how can you discriminate based on race? How can you hold the position that we shouldn't discriminate based on race? Everyone believes that race exists. It's a real, tangible reality that has legal applications and real world applications. This is true. And I hope everyone in the chat who is against what I'm saying right now, because I know, again, it's unpopular. It's unpopular. but I hope you really take a step back and try to steelman what I'm saying. That I'm not saying that interracial marriages are void, that they're invalid, okay? I'm not saying that interracial marriages are a sin, but what I am saying that race is real. Race is real. Race is real, and then to have interracial marriages, is that something that we should promote and be okay with? And for me, the implications of interracial marriage is that your family ceases to be the ethnic group of your ancestors. And if you're okay with that, then that's your choice. But the reality is, it's not just a thing that happens in a vacuum within your own family. And this is the problem with the whole nuclear family ideal that's been very popularized in the past few decades in America, that your family is just your family. Whatever your family does is no one else's business. Actually, that's not true. Because again, families are a larger part, and an extension of the community. They are a part of the community. And so, if you have a community that is Indian, and then Korean, and then Chinese, and then German, and then like Bengali, then what commonalities do they share? And of course, people say, yes, oh, Christ is above all. Yes, I can still have an Indian brother in Christ. Yes, that's true. But that still doesn't negate the fact that I am different from him because he's Indian, I'm Korean. So if we're okay with interracial marriages, like here's the thing. The reason why people are so gung-ho about interracial marriage and why this is so aggressively pushed in our modern society with multiculturalism and with the multi-ethnic society that we live in is because it detaches you from your ancestry and your lineage. It does. And then when people become a certain percentage this, and then interracial this, and then interracial that, and then they continue to become part this, part that, part this, part that, it detaches them from an ancestry and a heritage that can span thousands of years. Lazardo, thanks for the follow. And so what happens as a result is that you have people who are rootless cosmopolitans, and I talk about this all the time, that rootless cosmopolitans is not only extended to our homeland and our religious beliefs, but it's also extended to our ancestry and heritage. And these things mean something to us. And because all of us has been so brainwashed to thinking that this doesn't mean anything, that's why the left has been so powerful in wielding this against us. That they acknowledge the very human and fundamental desire for us to hold on to and identify with our ancestry. Every single person does this. I know there's people like you in the chat who are more politically inclined, so you think through these things a little more. But the reality is almost everyone does this. Almost everyone does this. And just because you're an exception and you don't do this doesn't mean that this is not a real thing that exists. This is a reason why BLM gained so much traction. This is a reason why the majority of black people identify with each other over all other groups. This is a reason why all these ethnic enclaves and these minority communities form in America and they become a blob of conformity, is because there is something that is very innate about who we are, and part of that is where we come from. We are not blank slate individuals. We're not blank slate individuals. So, Peaky Slipping, my take is that generally speaking, I think you should marry someone from the same cultural background. Most people are not built for changing nations. If I were to marry a Japanese woman, for example, I would essentially have to abandon my European culture for the sake of her, and vice versa. Not everyone is capable of that. Some people are. That's the exception, and the exception extremely rare. Yes. I totally agree. And so, like, this is also the thing that people always say, like, oh, you should only marry people of the same cultural background. And culture has nothing to do with race. It actually does. Because race is genetic, and so I'm not a racial determinist, but I'm a race realist. Where, for example, if your people group, generally speaking, on average, has a low IQ, what do you think that'll result in your civilization, in your country? Not the greatest. This is a reason why. I know this is gonna sound racist, okay? But please don't see it as race. I mean, whatever. I don't care if people see it as racist anymore. I know people who are good, understand my tensions and what I believe, will understand like what I'm actually trying to say. That there's a reason why black people have been poor for thousands and thousands of years in Africa, and why they act the same way literally in America too. Why the crime and the filth that plagues Africa is also found in America. It's because a lot of them are lower IQ. And if you have lower IQ, you can't really think into the future. You don't have as much introspection. You don't have as much of an understanding of the consequences for your actions. You have low impulse control. Instant gratification is something that you lend yourself towards instead of delayed gratification when you have lower IQ. Now, I'm not saying that all black people are going to be like that. That's not what I'm saying. And I think everyone understands that if you're trying to take what I'm saying at face value. But what I am saying on average, that's what happens. That's what happens. That's why they have such a high crime rate. That's why they have so many baby mamas. That's why they have so much fatherlessness. And that's why if you go to Africa, again, Africa, before Europeans found them, they didn't invent the wheel. They didn't have bridges. They were living in huts for all of history while Europeans were building massive churches and cathedrals, right? In East Asia, we were building massive palaces and having proper hygiene. Africans didn't have a written language. And then so you can chalk it up to resources. Africa is one of the most resource-dense place in the world. There's so much resources in Africa. Same thing with the indigenous tribes, right? So like, what I'm trying to say, right, is that there's a reason why, like, even, and something that's basic, like, we can go throughout history, we can talk about history, but even like modern applications, why Asians constantly score higher than white people on SAT tests. If you look at the international academic competitions, who is it? It's always Chinese people against Chinese people, right? It's Koreans versus Japanese. It's always East Asians against East Asians. Now, you have rare exceptions. You'll have those, like, white geniuses. You'll have white geniuses. You'll have, like, Indian geniuses. Like, so you'll have exceptions for sure. But broadly speaking, the stereotype that Asians are good at math, it's true for a reason. It exists for a reason because East Asians have the highest average IQ. That's how you go from Korea, like Korea being one of the poorest countries in the world because of war in the 1950s, right? It was just ravaged by war and it was gutted. And then literally in two generations, Korea becomes one of the most influential, let's three. I guess I'm over-exaggerating, but 3 generations, Korea becomes one of the most influential and powerful, richest countries in the world. And Korea has limited resources. It's a little puny, like booger-sized peninsula, okay? So there's that. While in Africa, we have given them trillions. Guys, trillions. Think about it. Trillions of aid, okay? I think the estimate is that it's like 17 Marshall Plans or something. Something insane. We've given Africa trillions and trillions of dollars, and they're still the poorest country, the poorest areas in the world, with the most amount of crime, with still slavery rampant, with acts of terrorism and violence rampant, with tribal warfare and turf warfare all over, with no serious governments for most of these African countries. So people say, oh, it's just culture, but people make the culture. People make the culture. And so, yes, we live in a multi-ethnic society, so I get why, you can just separate the culture from the race, but traditionally speaking, you never could, because your ethnicity, your racial identity was part of your culture because that's where you grew up. And so everyone understands this too. Like, this is something that everyone understands. It just takes a lot of brainwashing and bending over backwards to not accept, where it's like, oh yeah, in Korean culture we do this. And then so and if anyone sees a Korean, they're like, oh yeah, like that person is, largely speaking, gonna be abiding by Korean cultural customs. Like, this is something we all understand. And it's like, people always say that like race doesn't exist, ethnicity doesn't matter. I'm like, okay, if ethnicity doesn't matter, then why is the first thing that people always recognize about me that I'm Korean? It's the same argument that the libs and the progressives make about gender. It's just external, so it doesn't matter. No, your race, your ethnic identity is a culmination of thousands and thousands and thousands of years of your ancestors from one primary place. I get it, we all come from Adam and Eve, yes, but one primary place for thousands of years after we all scattered. One primary place for thousands and thousands of years. That means something. In the same way your gender means something, it means something. Your ethnic identity means something. And this is not an extreme thing because, again, everyone understands this. It's just, it's inconvenient to say. It's inconvenient to say that, yes, we are all humans. We are all humans. No one is saying we're not humans. No one's saying that, like, these people in these indigenous tribes are not people. They're still people who need the gospel, who need Christ, people who Christ died for. Yes, that is true. But that doesn't negate the real, very real reality that our racial identity, our ethnic identity, is a core part of who we are, and it informs the way that we view the world. and the way that we do politics. So I'm gonna show you a little bit of the hypocrisy that happens, where race is just a social construct, but also we should make interracial marriage mandatory until the white race is gone. So Joel Berry, again, I think Joel Berry has good intentions. I have nothing against him personally. Okay, he's always been cordial to me. But Joel Berry says this: gender is a God-ordained category the pagan left treats as a social construct. Race is a social construct the pagan right treats as a God-ordained category. Again, it says in scripture that God has instated the borders and the separation of people groups, the nations. He has instated the nations. Nations just means peoples. Okay? So he has ordained the peoples. That is true. Okay? You can't get around that. Like, we have subverted the definition of what it means, what a nation means. And so when you subvert what man and woman means, of course, you can get away with God didn't instate the genders. In the same way, if you get away from the traditional understanding and the meaning of nations, then yes, you can be like, oh yeah, God doesn't care. God doesn't care about nations. No, he does. And what nations are people, are shared people, shared ancestry. But anyways, and he says like, interracial marriage should be mandatory for the next 100 years. So, like, I don't think it should spark a war, pure dub. And I think we can be mature. I think we can be mature about this conversation. Unfortunately, there's a lot of gaslighting that happens, a lot of straw mans, a lot of red herrings, and a lot of like talking past each other. But the thing is, race is not a social construct. Okay, race is a real observed reality that has real political implications, and it is exercised in politics. If race is not real, how can you say you're against discriminating based on race? You can't hold those two positions at the same time. Where, yes, there's a lot of instances where you can hold two seemingly differing positions. But this is something that just cannot exist, where you make the claim race doesn't exist. It's a social construct. It's just made up. It doesn't actually exist. But then you have actual real implications of race existing. And you support that. You support interracial marriages, yet you say race doesn't exist? How does that make sense? Oh, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with the black and white person coming together and marrying. Okay, but then you can't say in the same vein and do this like semantics game that, oh yeah, race doesn't exist. Like that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. Here, like Samuel Say has done this too. There's no such thing as interracial marriage because there's no such thing as biologically distinct human races. But you are a product of interethnic marriage. So They do this thing too where they like kind of switch him back and forth between interracial and interethnic to kind of like, you know, confuse you and move the goalposts and things like that. But he's essentially saying, he's admitting here that you are a product of an interracial marriage, okay? That all people's races have combined in the past, blah, 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 blah. So you are a product of an interracial marriage, but there's no such thing as interracial marriages, right? So it's like, which one is it, Samuel? Which one is it? And Millennial Woes said this in response to Joel Berry: if peoples are social constructs, how is God able to choose a people? So again, in order to be in Jewish law, in order to be considered a Jew and to be an Israelite, your mom had to be a Jew. Okay, so there is a genetic component to it. And like I said, there's parts of the Old Testament where God forbade marrying foreigners. So the Israelites were, largely speaking, an ethnically homogenous society, and they were the people that God chose. And the thing that's disingenuous about this whole conversation is that the people who say that race doesn't exist, ethnicity doesn't matter, are the same people who will say you need to love the Jews and protect the Jews. I thought it doesn't exist. They use Galatians 3 to say there's neither Jew nor Greek, so therefore race doesn't exist, ethnicity doesn't matter. But in the same vein, they say, no, we should protect the Jews and we need to honor the Jews because the Jews are God's chosen people. Like, you can't hold those two things at the same time, and that's the hypocrisy. So they don't actually believe it. No one actually believes that race doesn't exist, that race is just a social construct. Because in application and in their political beliefs, their political applications, and all of other parts of the world and in society, they use real race as a very real category of people. So here, same thing. Look, I want to see this Josh Barzin guy, graphic designer for churches. There's no such thing as interracial marriage. There's one race, the human race. And I said this: aren't you guys tired of playing the semantic word games to avoid the point of contention? You don't actually believe this. In your follow-up tweet, you literally say your father is black and your mother is white, which means you acknowledge the existence of different races. Here, he said, by the way, I'm the child of a black father and a white mother. Both my parents are human, made in the image of God, and believers in His Son, Jesus Christ. God is honored by their marriage. No one is disputing what you said here, Josh. But the thing is, he says, there is no such thing as an interracial marriage. And then in the next tweet, he literally says, I am the product of an interracial marriage. There's no such thing as race, but then I acknowledge as a real category that my father is black and my mother is white. That's why, like, these people are disingenuous. And this is why, like, Christians need to be very careful when navigating this conversation, because there's a lot of deception that happens with this conversation that a lot of people like this, like, use in order to deceive people, and that is very, very dangerous. Like, deception and using this kind of, you know, it's very dangerous territory. Like, I do not recommend it. It's not becoming of a Christian. It's not becoming of a Christian. So you cannot say there's no such thing as race and then acknowledge the existence of races. Like, I don't. What do you mean? If you really believe there's no such thing as race, there's no such thing as interracial marriage, then you would say, then yes, I am just the child of a father and a mother who are human. But he says that he is, and he believes this, that his father is black, his mother is white. So they're hypocrites. They're hypocrites. And this is why, like, this is so frustrating to me. Like, if you are for interracial marriages, I don't even care, because that's your prerogative. We have freedom of conscience and association in this country, okay? But don't be disingenuous. You are literally like the libs. You are literally like the libs who say one thing and then say another. I'm so tolerant. I'm so tolerant, compassionate, and loving, but I want Charlie Kirk. I celebrate Charlie Kirk's death. Like, how? That can't exist. I'm empathetic, but I want conservatives all to die. Like that, how are you empathetic? You are not. In the same way, you can't say that you believe that there is no such thing as race. There's no such thing as black and white, Asian, Indian. There's nothing like that. It is just one. We're all one people. And then say say confidently, I am the child of a black father and a black mother. It goes to show that these people don't actually believe this. They actually don't believe this. No one believes this. No one actually believes that race doesn't exist. No one. There's not one person who actually believes this. And I've explained to this. I'm going to say it blue in the face because they literally use race as a real category of how to do politics. They say there's no such thing as interracial marriage, but they say they are for interracial marriage. They say there's no such thing as race, but they defend the Civil Rights Act and say, no, we shouldn't discriminate based on race. How can you discriminate based on race if there's no race to begin with? Because you acknowledge that there is race and everyone can discern who is black, who is white, who is Asian. Everyone can discern this, okay? I said this too, because no one in the world will be able to recognize, see, race doesn't mean anything. There are not distinct differences in race when people assimilate to a common culture. Yes, because no one in the world will be able to recognize that I'm Asian from what I look like. Okay, I go anywhere in the world, they will say immediately that I am from Asia. I'm from East Asia. I'm not from Vietnam. I'm not from Cambodia. I'm not from Indonesia. I'm not from India. I'm not from Germany. I'm not from Poland. I'm not from these places. I'm from Korea. Broadly speaking, East Asia. They might say Chinese or Japanese at first. They might get that wrong, which I got all the time growing up. Yo, are you Chinese or Japanese? And I'll be like, I'm Korean. And they'll be like, oh, like, is that a type of Chinese? And no one believes this. No one actually believes this. This is why people who say there's no races, race doesn't exist, are lying to you straight in your face. And either they are playing a semantics game where they say race as a species and ignore the fact that when we say race, and we're talking about this conversation, we're saying race as a very real, like, category of, you know, civilizational groups that have common ancestry, that come from the common area of the world. Whether they're doing that or they're just lying to you straight in your face to literally beat their chest, to literally, I know this is graphic, but they're literally getting off and masturbating to good feelings about themselves, how virtuous they are. Like, I don't know what their intentions are, but the reality is they're completely dishonest. They are dishonest. Whether they know it or not, whether they're doing it intentionally or not, they're being dishonest. And no matter how many times we look at them straight in the face that, yes, we acknowledge that these are all people. We're all people, black, white, yellow, brown, whatever. We're all people made in the image of God. We all need a savior, and Christ died for all of us. No matter how many times we say it blue in the face, like, they will literally ignore it. And they'll say, oh, like, oh, you think that, like, oh, black people can't go to heaven? Like, no. If you believe that, I condemn that, because that's not right. That's wrong. If you say a person group, a people group are eternally damned and they will never be able to be saved and Christ did not die for them, that is a heresy. That is wrong. That's wicked. That's evil. Okay, that's evil. Because I've had people in this same camp tell me, we brought it up on stream, I think earlier last month, this woman told me that I am not able to be Christian because I'm Korean, which is freaking insane. That's insane. That's insanity. So if anyone says a black person can't be Christian because they're black, or if a brown person can't be Christian because they're brown, like, that's wrong. You are damned to hell. But what we are saying is that race is a real category, and if you want to preserve your racial and by extension your ethnic identity and pass that down to your children, like all of our ancestors have done before, that is actually a good thing. And the only reason why we have to defend it now is because we have mass migration and we live in a multicultural society. No one thought about this. No one, like, people thought about it, but no one had any contentions against the fact that, hey, your family, if you're Korean, should remain Korean. No one had contentions about that. There's a lot of Korean Christians, by the way, who believe this, who don't want their children marrying non-Koreans. Are they sinning? Is that a sin? And these people claim that it's a sin. These people claim that it's a sin to be against having a preferential, having like a preference, a prioritization, a preference for your own people to have your children look like you. You have to have your children be Korean if you are Korean. These people say it's sin. It's not sin. And you can't claim that it's sin because the Bible doesn't call it sin.